Hello, this is Mark. We are jumping into the second course on Big History. Like I said, I'm kind of following David Christian's overall kind of template for Big History, but I'm not like going to do exactly like a one-for-one. In this case, I'm actually kind of combining a couple of his lectures into one and kind of simplifying. Number one, I'm not as like smart and a good orator as him. He can give a lot of stories and tales and do things really well as a professor, and really, so I would highly recommend part of this course is kind of just a summarization, if you will, and then teaching to hopefully inspire folks to go check out like other Big History course, especially Professor David Christensen, PhD, his course that he does, which you can find on the Great Courses. You can find tons of YouTube videos and all kinds of things that really go in. I think a couple of his books are trying to remember. I'll remember it next time and actually point out some of his books, like Origin of something, I don't know, Origin Tale or something. But anyways, if you just look him up, David Christian, Big History, you will find all of the books and courses and works he's done. So, yeah, we're going to cover scale and complexity today, and these two are very important. Scale is kind of something that needs to be looked at in the scope of like Big History, because it's massive, and it's something that kind of needs to, even though we can't fully grasp it because it's just insanely huge, it's something that we kind of need to get an idea of what kind of scale we're looking at when we talk about Big History. And the second thing is complexity, which that is really, it's a something to understand, but it's really more the theme of, if there's a centralized theme when we're looking at Big History from the Big Bang to like today, what is a general theme you could look at and be able to say, okay, this is something that's happened throughout, and what we're going to be focused on with a bias toward planet like Earth and humanity and that kind of thing is a rise in complexity. We could do a Big History course on just a random part of the universe, and odds are it's just going to be an open vacuum of space, right? We're focusing on here's how things started and here's the events that have happened that led to our solar system and our Earth and us and animals and everything else in between, life itself, and the habitat that has been formed on Earth to allow that, right? So yeah, these are things we're going to get to. I've changed the format of this video. I did the first one, and then I watched it, and I'm like, wow, that is really small. So I'm kind of learning how to do this as I go. But I'm going to try this format out, just where you can actually read it better, and it's not like super small on most viewing platforms. So hopefully this works out a little bit better. So we're going to go into the first part of it. So the first part we're going to cover is scale, and really, looking at this and incorporating the human element when it comes to, because Big History is humans studying all history, if you will, in one. The way our brains work and, the way that we kind of evolved in small groups of hunter-gatherers and that kind of thing, we are really good at looking things in the scale and perspective of our lifetimes or what is immediately around us, right? We understand tigers, okay? You're walking, hunting, trying to find food, and you see a tiger. That is understandable. You need to do something about this tiger in front of you, whether it's, run from it, fight it, do something, throw a stick, I don't know. But when it comes to like the scale of billions of years and a galaxy, that is not something, the concept of, okay, these are stars and galaxies in space, that is a kind of a new concept in the history of mankind, people-kind, that we actually know these things exist. They're not just flickering things up in the sky. It's really hard to grasp that. Like, let's say, okay, there's a threat from a tiger. Okay, you can do something about that, hopefully. There's a threat in the galaxy, like a quasar or supernova or something. Well, it's either going to wipe everybody out, or we just don't have a concept of that, like as a thing. Like we don't have, because the way we've come about, it's just very hard for us to grasp the immenseness and everything around us. We can grasp it at a small level, but at a massive universe level, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory as to why that is extremely hard. But it's something Big History tries to do, or at least get us a small, at least a little bit of understanding of the scales that we are talking about with both time, distance, and things that we're going to cover soon. So speaking of, humans, we live to maybe be at the oldest 110, 120 years at the very oldest. But when it talks about life, we kind of have the perspective and the scale of life. And wanted to include this because right here is the world's oldest thing. And this tree is in Eastern California. Apparently the exact location of it is very hidden because they don't want people going and messing with it or chopping it down or something. But this tree is literally 5,000 years old. This tree was alive before the pyramids, right? This is the oldest thing that we know of on planet Earth right now. And so when you look at perspectives, when it comes to life, if you will, I mean, really our max range, if we were a tree, or this particular species of tree, is literally 5,000 years. And that's it. That's the oldest that life on Earth, that is the perspective of life. So when we get into the timelines and the things that Big History covers, I mean, it's obvious why this is going to seem almost too far-fetched for us to really grasp in our scope and scale. So to do that, what we have to do is something that's called a Gestalt shift. And a Gestalt shift, that's a German word, but it's really a shift in perspective. One of the things David Christian talks about in his lecture series, and I'm just going to use it because it's really, really good, is the analogy of an ant, or comparison of an ant on an elephant. Let's say you're an ant with your ant friends and family, and you're living on an elephant. Well, all you know, I mean, you might know you're on an elephant, but it's highly doubtful. All you know is that you're on a terrain and a place that has ridges and, hills and, all these, and it moves and there's earthquakes every now and then. And let's say that someone came and, retrieved one of the ants and was able to pull it back and allow it to see more and more. So it would say, oh, okay, there's my ridge and there's my part. And then it suddenly, as it got further and further away, it would say, oh wow, that's an actual huge animal that we've been living on. And oh, that's the ear apparently we've been living on. And that's why there's so many earthquakes. And we should probably move somewhere else on the animal where the ear's not constantly moving. And then it would see outside of the elephant that, there's earth and a sky and, I mean, there's other animals. And I mean, the ant would probably have an existential crisis at this point, seeing all these things, because all it has known is, the little place and the lifespan that it has on this elephant, which sounds really sad, but we are kind of the same way when it comes to Earth. And one of the great ways to capture it is there was an astronaut, Sultan bin Salman al-Saud, I think I said that correctly, an Arabian astronaut who, great quote, but he was talking about, when he went up to space, the team he was with, he said, on the first day that we, all the astronauts were pointing to their own countries, here, there's America, there's, Saudi Arabia, there's wherever, and he said the third or fourth day we were, couldn't really see the countries anymore. So we started looking at continents. So there's North America, there's, Asia, Europe, etc. And he said by the fifth day, that kind of went out the window. And we literally were just, as astronauts, we're pointing at Earth, being like, okay, that's where we're from. Like the whole perspective shift, the Gestalt shift had happened where, a lot of these astronauts and Neil Armstrong who went to the moon, when you look at Earth as this blue marble, it's like all of the politics and all the things of Earth, kind of become small, and we're like, this is our planet, right? So that's the kind of shift that you kind of have, and even more so, not just saying, oh, there's Earth, but at a massive scale, this shift to even begin to grasp the beginnings and the first, stages of like Big History, right? So to give one more Gestalt shift, if you will, of understanding the scope of our universe. It's very hard to say or explain. Our universe is pretty darn big, and there's a lot out there. It's easy to say, and it's easy for someone to hear that and be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But until you start comparing things with the scopes that we know, it's really hard to try and get that grasp. So if you're traveling in an airplane, which most people have, you're traveling roughly about 550 miles per hour, which is pretty fast, compared to like traveling in a car or whatever. You're definitely breaking a speed limit with that. So we know if you've flown across the country, like the continental United States, it's going to take you about 5 hours, which is okay, that makes sense. Well, to reach the moon, which human beings have done, and spacecraft, etc., it would take you in that same airplane about 18 days, which is a lot longer than you would think. Well, to reach the sun in our solar system would take about 20 years in that same airplane. That sounds pretty crazy, but trust me, it gets a lot crazier as we keep going. To reach Jupiter, our biggest planet in the solar system, every diagram you see, it all has the planets like close together. It's like, oh, Jupiter's just right over there. Well, it would take you 82 years to reach Jupiter in that same airplane, traveling 550 miles per hour. It would, an entire lifetime, you would finally get there. To reach Pluto, our farthest known, not planet anymore, but big rock out there, not the farthest rock, but, one of the most known used to be planets, it would only take 750 years, far beyond any human lifespan, to reach it in a standard, very, jet plane, traveling fast, right? To reach the nearest star, to get outside of our solar system, and actually get to the nearest star, which is Alpha Centauri, it would only take 5 million years in that same airplane, and it would only be 25 trillion miles to reach it. And you might think, wow, that's really, really far, and that's crazy. Well, that's just the nearest star. And as far as stars go, there's about 100 billion of them in our Milky Way galaxy. So that's just the nearest one. Imagine getting to one on the other side of of our own Milky Way galaxy. It's insane. But then it's like, okay, well, that's all huge and pretty far. But then beyond that, there's about 100 billion estimated galaxies in the known universe. So if you just keep going, scale up, scale up, scale up. Okay, closest star is this far away, and that's just a local star. I mean, then we have this massive galaxy and then the massive universe. Like, it is insane. It's a 5 million year trip to get to our closest neighbor, and that's our closest neighbor in one galaxy of billions of galaxies. Like, the size and scope of the universe is just really darn near impossible to fathom, but that is the scale that we are working with when it comes to things like big history. So yeah, scales are huge. Time is huge. We're talking about 13.8 billion years with that kind of distance and that massive amount of space. But let's talk about the next thing, which is complexity. And this is going to be the central theme, the rising in complexity as it comes to like big history and how things have happened. So what is complexity? Like, what is the definition? I mean, it's easy to look at something and say that looks complex, but really anything that's complex is just something that consists of diverse components, that if you took those components by themselves, they would not readily appear to be able to make the thing when combined that it makes. And the easy example, or best way to, an easy way to explain that is if you have two elements, hydrogen and oxygen, on their own, they do their own thing, but you put them together and then you have water. And you wouldn't look at hydrogen by itself and be like, I bet we can make water out of that, or oxygen. But complexity, you put them together and you have this whole thing that we depend on for life, and all life on Earth somewhat depends on. So the more complex something is, this is kind of a general rule, the less time it lasts due to entropy. Elements last a very long time. Molecules last a very long time. Very, very complex things like tigers do not last nearly as long. Life, which is a very complex components brought together, tons of elements and molecules and systems and organs and everything, very, very complex. Obviously, that is within the span of a lifetime for whatever organism we're talking about. So the rise in complexity, you really see that the more complex it is, the more, expiration, the quicker expiration date it seems to have. A vacuum of space has always been the vacuum of space. It's very simple. But when you have hydrogen, then you have more complex elements, and then you combining of elements into different things, stars, et cetera, et cetera. These things have expiration dates on them, right? So what causes complexity? Like, we have the Big Bang and the universe, which we are going to go into in depth, but really complexity is created by work or energy flow. So in other words, there has to be some instability. Things have to happen. Like there has to be energy flow from one place to another, like the second law of thermodynamics, which is, energy from hotter to colder, right? There's always going to be energy flow, and energy has to be there and be moving. Work has to happen for these complex things to occur, whether it is, planets or stars or people, and that'll make a lot more sense as we go through all this. But if you look at like our solar system, there's a ton of energy flow from the sun, which is a massive, fusion bomb in the sky that is sending out energy, which is being, used by all the organisms here on Earth. It's a starting point for so many things, but it's basically an energy flow from one system to another. So what about the second law of thermodynamics, which I already mentioned? Because another part of the second law of thermodynamics, if you're familiar with the laws, is that, okay, energy flows, but it flows into a state of evenness, of entropy. So like, okay, you put hot water in a cup and let it sit there, it's going to cool off. It's going to, energy is going to dissipate. You put hot water and cold water together, well, it's going to flow and stabilize, and everything's going to be the same temperature eventually. You look at the universe, like things tend to stabilize. Stars tend to run out of energy. They explode, or they kind of die off into red dwarfs, and things happen. Like entropy is the way of things. So how in the world, if entropy is an established thing, how in the world do we have increase in complexity to make human beings and to make everything that we see? Like, that seems to be a paradox, and it's something that science has tried to understand and explain. And as an example, I'm going to butcher this name, Ilya Prigogine, a Nobel Prize physicist. He kind of proposed a spooky science, if you will, that matter and energy have a tendency to move towards self-organization. And that could be a possibility, but that has not been proven. Like, that hasn't been something that, we've been able to prove and point to and say, yeah, that is a definite property of everything in the universe, that it will do that if you put enough of it together. But a better explanation is that, while the universe as a whole does have an increased entropy, you have these pockets, like our solar system, where energy flow for a period of time is very, very abundant. You have stars, you have planets, and there's a lot of energy flow there. So you can have things like this increase in complexity in life and all these different things. So it doesn't violate the law. It's just that, the universe is a whole system. You do have pockets of just massive energy flows, and that's why we can have what we're having today. But spoiler alert, if you look at like the sun and everything, it will have an expiration date, but it's a really, really long time away, and it's not something that anyone today needs to worry about. But yes, there will be entropy eventually in the same solar system that has allowed so much complexity to occur. So yeah, all of this, when you're talking about these two subjects, it can seem, let's be honest, like I've been in so many classes and heard so many lectures and read so many books, and it just seems really depressing. That's something that I'll be honest, and if it hasn't crossed anyone else's mind with science, is that you can learn a lot, but in the end, it's like, okay, well, that's sad. We live in a massive universe and on a speck of dust known as planet Earth, and everything's massive, and we just seem insignificant. Well, when you look at the scale of it, that can seem to be true. Like, you look at just how massive our galaxy is, the Milky Way galaxy, and then there's billions and billions and billions of galaxies. Like what? Like where are we in that? Especially with human beings, with a lot of the way we've had the perspective that we are the center of the universe. We are. Everything revolves around the Earth, or we are the center of it all. And then to learn this in science, you're just like, oh wow, that kind of stinks. Maybe we aren't special, or something. But the cool thing is while science at the scale part of it can seem to insinuate that, when you look at complexity, you kind of get a different picture. So, human beings are very complex. Our brains are one of the most, if not the most complex things known. Is when you look at complexity, these synapses, the millions of connections, just the fact that we are studying big history and we're looking at, if it's the universe, forming into complex things known as humans, we're actually looking back. It could be the universe looking back on itself, or if you have a religious perspective, different things. But we are super complex. So it's kind of like you look at the whole universe and the scale of it. 99.9 whatever percent of the whole universe, I don't know what the exact percentage, is literally empty space. It's the vacuum of space, right? In between, we talked about the nearest star is 5 million or 25 trillion miles, and it would take 5 million years to get there in a standard, jet plane. But if you were to just randomly insert yourself anywhere in our universe, just anywhere, completely random, odds are you would be in the most remote, not the most remote, but in a remote vacuum of space far away from anything. I mean, just nothingness. You might be able to see some stars where you end up, hopefully, but that is the most of our universe. So it's kind of like looking at the Sahara Desert and being like, man, that's vast. And I feel really insignificant because look how big that desert is. But in all reality, when it comes to complexity, we are on Earth, which is one of the most complex places with all the life and everything that's come together that we know of. Like, we haven't found another place with life and these complex systems and everything. So it's kind of like living in New York City, where there is the most complexity and there's so much going on, and staring out at the Sahara Desert and being like, well, that stinks, So it depends on what perspective you're looking at. That, it can be sad, but it can also be like, wow, this is really the place to be, like planet Earth and everything we have. If you were elements out there in the universe looking in, you're like, that is the place to be. That is the cosmopolitan area of complexity, right? So, it is kind of miraculous that we have all this where we were at. And, it's something to be, proud and happy of, and, feel like, wow, we're pretty insignificant. Either way, whether you have a religious perspective or a purely, scientific, or either way, it is pretty darn miraculous that we have what we have here, and everything has evolving complexity has happened. So that begs the question, and this is what big history is going to, based on what we know in science, based on what we can point to and measure, how did we get from a Big Bang, which created a single atoms of hydrogen? And that is a hydrogen atom right there, one proton, neutron, and electron. How did we get from that to family and Vin Diesel and all these cars and Fast and Furious and the Earth? I mean, it's funny. I was looking just for the most absurd thing to say that we've gotten to with complexity, and my mind for some reason went to Vin Diesel and Fast and Furious. But hey, if you look at that picture, there's a lot of complexity there. Vin Diesel's pretty complex. All the cars back there are pretty complex. All the people back there, there's a road. He's clearly being held down by gravity. There's all these things there. You can see the sky. It's at night. All the lights, all the electricity and the electrons. I mean, there's so much there. But how did we get there? How do we go from a universe and a Big Bang, from single atoms floating around to this? And that is what big history is going to try and answer, and at least show the flow of complexity, how we got from point A to point B. So that's what we're going to be going into with many, many courses. I don't know how many it's going to be, but we will endeavor to try and get there. But thank you very much if you made it all the way this far of understanding these two things of complexity and scale. But really would appreciate any feedback that anyone has. I don't, anything good or bad. If you want to correct me on anything, please do. Like I said, when studying big history, you're kind of looking at a jack of all trades, but maybe not being an expert in any, right? All these scientific disciplines and trying to pull it all together. But I would really love anyone to add anything, correct anything, or point anything out that maybe that was not mentioned that's super interesting or may add to it. But thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you at the next course, which I don't know what's going to be. I'm kind of looking at everything and deciding where I want to go to next. And obviously the Big Bang will eventually be something that we're covering as the very first thing, but we'll eventually get there. I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 more courses to go of covering some of these topics. So yeah, I hope you have a good one, and we will see you next one. Okay. Bye-bye.